KU libraries and uses literature as a springboard to launch community conversations about important issues of our times. Each year, we distribute hundreds of free copies of the selected book and invite cornerstone community institutions to host lectures, panels, discussion groups, and film screenings throughout Lawrence. This year's Read Across Lawrence selection is Winter's Bone, a modern American tragedy that explores poverty and family tradition as a young girl searches for her father amidst the culture of meth production in the Missouri Ozarks. We hope you'll join us next week, too, to meet Winter's Bone author Daniel Woodrell at Liberty Hall. Last year, we welcomed the Dole Institute of Politics into the Read Across Lawrence family when they hosted journalist Alex Hurd to discuss his book, The Eyes of Willie McGee, a true life To Kill a Mockingbird story that explored the judicial system and the race politics in mid-century Mississippi. Tonight, we are honored to be back at the Dole Institute with Nick Redding, journalist and author of the New York Times bestselling book, Methland, The Death and Life of American Small Town, who will be interviewed by Dole Institute Director Bill Lacey. A true life Winter's Bone story, Methland probes the politics of methamphetamine use, its effects on addicts and their communities, and the families and children who, like Ree Dolly, are left behind to try to survive. Nick Redding spent 4 years in the small rural town of Oelwein, Iowa, in the mid-2000s with a mission to chronicle meth abuse in rural America. Once a railroad, meatpacking, and farming hub, Oelwein has been battered by the farm crisis and decimated by job losses. More recently, record amounts of methamphetamine are available on Oelwein streets, just like thousands of other small towns across the United States. The thing I like best about Methland is that it transcends a sensationalist or reductionist attitude to look deeply and thoughtfully at the meth pandemic. Viewing meth as a crime story vastly oversimplifies the problem, Redding has written, and he's taken pains to craft a narrative that avoids stereotyping, trivializing, or caricaturing. From cooks, addicts, and traffickers to the county prosecutor, town doctor, and DEA agents, down to the librarians and the owner of the local dive bar to tell the complicated story of meth in small-town America. Redding is a native of St. Louis, Missouri, and received his MFA in creative writing from New York University, where he was a university fellow from 1995 till 1997. His freelance writing has been published in Harper's, Food and Wine, Outside, Fast Company, and Details. After living in New York City for 13 years, he now lives with his wife and son in St. Louis, where he is a visiting scholar at the St. Louis University School of Law while working on his third book, Heartland, about what the Midwest will look like in 50 years. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Nick Redding.
Nick, welcome to the Dole Institute at the University of Kansas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Let's start by asking you to talk a little bit about your upbringing and kind of your education and how you decided to get into writing.
First of all, thank you very much for all being here and for having me for dinner. I don't have a Truman Capote type. I wanted to be a writer from the very beginning sort of story. I wish I had a Truman Capote story at all. I would have a new suit instead of one that's 10 years old. But I wouldn't say backed into it, but it took me a little while to, in fact, I was reminded being driven here tonight by the young lady who brought me, and I asked her what she was going to do after college, and as soon as I asked her that, because she's a senior, and I thought, why in the world are you asking that? That would have been the worst question anybody could have asked you when you were a senior in college. But the way that it came about for me was that When I left and went to school, my mother thought that it was imperative that an upstanding citizen would not only have a bachelor's degree but a graduate degree. And so in many ways, in order to satisfy her, I ended up taking a fellowship to NYU, and it was a purely mercenary decision. It was not made because I thought that I could be or wanted to be a writer. It was a place that offered me some money to go to school there, and it got me out of St. Louis, which was a place I didn't want to be living at the time. I've come to change my mind considerably. And while I was there, I took a job first in advertising. It was a night program where I went to school for my MFA. And I took a job in advertising, and after that, I took a job as a magazine editor. And how I became a writer was one day I was in my office, and I may have heard of Sebastian Junger. He's the guy who wrote The Perfect Storm. And at the time, I worked for Outdoor Life magazine, which is an old hook and bullet magazine. And they decided, this was in the mid-90s, they decided, like many other magazines, that they wanted to become Outside magazine. Why? Because John Krakauer had just written this thing about people dying on whatever mountain in the Himalayas, and then he became famous. Everybody wanted to be outside. They wanted to fill this new niche. And so we, at the time, hired Sebastian, among other people, including, I think, David Mamet was somebody that, I mean, this is a hunting and fishing magazine, right, that's hiring these people to write for them. And I was sitting in my office, and I was writing, I was pretty low on the totem pole, so I had to write the checks, which is to say that I had to envision lives that were decidedly not my own. And I was writing him a check for like $25,000 to do a story in, I think, Vanuatu or something like that, that we never ended up printing, and nothing ever came of it. And I thought, geez, I could go to Vanuatu and I could write a story that nobody will ever read. Or I can be the dope who's here paying this guy to do it, So like, this is a scam I want in on. And so I had worked for a while before that as a fly fishing guide down in Chile and Patagonia, and there was a good story there that I decided I wanted to tell, so I quit my job and I went back to Chile, and I ended up writing my first book about this family of semi-nomadic gauchos living in Chile and Patagonia. And since then, here I am.
How did you come to write the book Methland? Kind of, what was your purpose in writing that book?
There's two answers to that, and one of them actually does have, I tell people all the time that a book about a small town in Iowa actually began sitting next to a fence in Patagonia. And so there's a backstory and then there's a front story, and so if you can stand to listen to both of them, then the backstory is that, so where we lived in Patagonia was an area the size of Rhode Island, and there were 119 people that lived there. So imagine, living in the state of Rhode Island with 118 of your best friends. And there was one road, and there was no vehicle traffic. It was a dirt road, and everything was done on horseback. And anyway, there was a river that ran through the middle of it. And there was no way across the river except for a suspension bridge that the dictator Augusto Pinochet had built at a certain point. It was his gift to the people of this part of Patagonia so that they could get back and forth across the river. And my reporting strategy at the time in interviewing people was to borrow a horse from the guy who I lived with, and he would literally draw me maps in the dirt. He would say, if you go up this valley here and you get to where the forest starts, and then you take a right, and you take, like Bugs Bunny, you take a right at Albuquerque, and next thing you know, you're in New Jersey or whatever it is. And you'll find a cabin up there, and this is a guy who you might want to talk to. Great. So one day I got to the suspension bridge, and there was another guy trying to come across the bridge, which is, it's like a traffic jam in Patagonia. There's never anybody trying to come across the bridge because there's only 118 of you. And so we figured this was a good time to sit down and talk. And he was on his way to Argentina to sell some colts. He had with him he had a string of 7 colts that he was going to take across the mountains, which is a 2-day ride. And he said, you want to come to Argentina? I said, sure, I got nothing better to do. I may as well go to Argentina. And we're riding along, and the illiteracy rate in that part of Patagonia is like 100%, essentially. He says, I got this brother who lives in Idaho. And I thought, there's no way you have a brother who lives in Idaho. It's not possible. And he said, yeah, I got this brother, and he works on a ranch up there in Idaho. And I've got these letters that he has sent me, and I don't know how to read, so will you read me his letters? And so we rode along, and I read him his brother's letters, and what they described was a town in Idaho of 1,286 people called Gooding, Idaho. And they were remarkable pieces of evidence of globalization, essentially. But they said two things that stuck out to me. One of the things that they said was, I never knew that there was poverty in the United States. That's what his brother was saying in these letters. And the second thing that he said was, there's this thing around here. It's this drug that people do, and there are some Mexican guys that come by the bunkhouse at night, and on their way to sell this drug that the white people all love, or that the Americans all love, they come by and they drink some beer, and we all hang out. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't. Both of those things put together, that there would be a town which is a major, essentially, trafficking point for a drug that I had never heard of, which turned out to be meth, of course. I put that away somewhere. And when I got back to the United States, I decided that I would go to Idaho and find his brother. I thought that might be the logical ending to this first book that I wrote. And so I did. I went out there and I found his brother, and when I was there, I happened to meet the same drug dealers in the same bunkhouse that these letters had described. And I was, fluent in Spanish, and one of them described to me the business that he did, and I was totally and thoroughly fascinated by it. Because the reality is this town of 1,286 people was a major transshipment point for methamphetamine moving from west to east. That was the first thing. The second thing was that during that time, I was going back and forth for holidays to Missouri, where I'm from, and it became very obvious to me in some of the places that I used to hang out that meth was not just a problem in Idaho or in some place that I could easily, that didn't seem a part of my reality. It was very much, overnight, it seemed to me, become a part of life in my home. And I decided that that's what I had to write about.
Mm-hmm. Give us a little bit of historical context for meth.
For me, the history of it is a surprising one. What we read about is that people make it in their bathtub, and which is sort of shocking, and that seems, in a lot of ways, at the time, and maybe still, that's kind of where the story ends. That's a thing that people could cling to. But the reality is that meth is a very old drug. It was first synthesized in 1898 in Japan. To almost, it was synthesized quietly and seemed like it would be relegated to a future of nothingness. But through a series of essentially of coincidences, by the 1930s, methamphetamine had come to be known in the United States as a miracle drug. And it was a big business drug. It was manufactured in huge quantities by SmithKline, which I believe today is still SmithKline in French, but I don't take my word on that. Anyway, a big pharmaceutical company. And it was manufactured as a treatment for many different things, from a cure to alcoholism, a cure for depression, a cure for erectile dysfunction. It was administered to stroke victims. So it was sort of seemed as being a solution to many different medical problems. Not just in the United States, but in Imperial Japan, in what was soon to become Nazi Germany, and in Great Britain. And probably that's the beginning of it. Probably the most relevant part is that during World War II, it was given in huge quantities to servicemen, American, British, German, and Japanese. So part 3 of the history is that after the war, you had a lot of people who were essentially meth addicts. And you had 4 industrializing nations in which, and the significance of that is places where there were many manufacturing jobs, there were many blue-collar jobs that were building the economies of these 4 places, and you had a bunch of meth addicts, and meth became a drug choice that was that was very useful given in those cultural terms because it allowed you to work harder for longer. And mind you, at the time, we're talking about the 1950s, this is still not an illegal drug. This is a drug that's being pharmaceutically produced by the millions and millions of pills. It was only in the 1980s that meth became a black market drug. So from 1898 until roughly 1980, this was a pharmaceutically produced drug for which there was a huge black market and a huge white market.
How does it affect its users?
The 3 of the primary effects are, the primary effect is not that different from any drug, whether it's cocaine or whether it's alcohol or whether it's nicotine. And what I mean by that is that it essentially, anybody who's ever been in the hospital and had surgery and they give you the deal where you can press the morphine button or whatever painkiller you have, that's what any of these drugs allows you to do. It allows you to release neurotransmitters and make yourself feel good at will, as opposed to having to do something biologically imperative in order to get the release of those. So, you eat a good meal and you feel sated, you've released neurotransmitters and you feel good. You have sex, you feel good. You drink water when you're thirsty, etc. So meth is not different from other drugs in its ability to hand you control of that neurochemical organizational power, essentially. The thing that is different about meth neurobiologically is the sort of the biochemical power of the release that is engendered by that transaction. And there have been studies that have shown that it is in fact, it simply it not only releases neurotransmitters, it blocks their reuptake in your brain. So that what that means to you and I is that if you smoke crack, you stay high for 20 minutes. If you smoke meth, you stay high for 12 hours. So essentially because the reuptake of the neurotransmitter has been blocked. So you're high for longer. But it also shuts down basic core functions of the body so that you're not hungry, you're not thirsty, you're not sleepy, and you feel really good.
Okay. Your book is set in Oelwein, Iowa. Can you kind of tell us why you selected Oelwein and how you went about gathering information for your book?
I selected, I would say in some ways, I was going to say that Oelwein selected me, but that's not really true. I did not pick Oelwein because Oelwein has the worst meth problem in the world. If you wanted to make the argument for the place with the worst meth problem in the world, you would pick somewhere in Southeast Asia, statistically speaking, in terms of the proportion of the population that is meth addicted. I picked Oelwein essentially out of sort of, when you're a journalist, you spend a lot of time on the phone, and you're looking for two things, or at least I'm looking for two things. One is a place and that will help me tell a story, but you can't have a story without people. And the unfortunate reality for Oelwein is that after literally hundreds of phone calls to many people in many places throughout the United States, I happened to get the guy who is the town doctor of Oelwein on the telephone. And it just so happened that he and I really hit it off. And it just so happened that, and this is not to undermine the reality that Oelwein in many ways is, you would pick Oelwein given a list of towns statistically. But you've got to have people, and you've got that. Without them, you have a story. You don't have a story. It just so happened that the town doctor had a twin brother who was the former public defender. And so the public defender, of course, is well acquainted with the police chief and with the prosecutor. And, literally at the end of an afternoon, I had spoken with all of them and bought a ticket to fly from New York, where I was living, to Iowa the next day.
One of the things that you do in the book is you paint an economic picture of Oelwein as being a town pretty much in economic decline. How much does that contribute, across the whole Midwest, the whole country, to the meth problem?
I think it contributes significantly. I mean, I think that we rightly consider it to be a foregone conclusion that poverty goes hand in hand with substance abuse. That's not to say that if you are not impoverished, you have no chance of abusing substances. That's crazy, right? I mean, but if you look at it in terms of proportionality and what percentage of your what percentage of drug use is happening, then there's a fairly direct correlation with the economic reality of a place. So just to put into very quick perspective the economic reality of Oelwein, Iowa, for 100 plus years it was a very prosperous place. What made it prosperous? Meat packing, the railroad, and farming. And up until about 1980, this is a town of, at the time, it was close to 8,000 people. 2,000 people were employed by the meatpacking plant. So that's not 2,000 of the employment age people in Oelwein. That's 2,000 of the, so proportionately, that's a huge part of the town that is working in one meatpacking plant. That meatpacking plant was paying people $18 an hour with full benefits. And part of the deal was that when you became an employee, you had to own $5,000 of stock in the meatpacking plant. Number two major employer was the railroad. They had the largest engine shops west of the Mississippi River, and had for a very long time. Number three is farming. Average size of a farm in that county was somewhere on the order of 200 acres. So that's in 1980, give or take. By 1990, about 40% of all farms had gone out of business as a result of the farm crisis. The meatpacking plant had been bought by Iowa Beef Products, which was the major buyer of distressed assets in that time. Hourly wages had gone from $18 an hour to $6.23 with no benefits. And the railroad had gone out of business. So I don't know what, obviously the University of Kansas is a major economic driver in the town of Lawrence. I have not done, but you have to begin to imagine what that means. $18 to $6.23 with no benefits is a huge revenue loss. Add on to that 40% of the farming operations go out of business, and then a loss of 300 railroad jobs in the space of a decade. I don't think, that's like apocalyptic. I mean, it's just, there's nothing left.
You have some interesting characters in the book, and you kind of humanize and personalize the story. Could you take a few minutes and talk about some of the most interesting characters, the ones that you found engaging, and kind of what their role in the story was and how that helped you tell this story?
So one of the primary characters is the town doctor. He's the town general practitioner. He's not the only doctor in town, but he's the town general practitioner, which in a place of 6,000 people means that he had exposure to pretty much everybody. So the book essentially follows 4 years in the life of this town, and it uses several people. It follows 4 years in the life of several people. So the town doctor, one of his patients who was kind of a meth addict who had blown himself up cooking meth, and was in many ways, it was almost sort of like a Boo Radley sort of character around town. Why was he a Boo Radley character? Because he burned 78% of his body in the resulting fire after the meth lab blew up, lost most of his nose, lost most of his fingers. He was 37 years old. He was 3 months in the intensive care unit in Iowa City, and during that time had 4 heart attacks and lived through it. Came back to town, the first thing he did was got high. So he's a major character. He was a patient of the doctor. Another one was the town prosecutor. I say the town prosecutor, he's technically an assistant county prosecutor. Another one is the mayor, who sort of came on the scene and was elected at the peak of the crisis in this town. So when I say the peak of the crisis, in a town of 6,000 people in 2003, they were busting 3 meth labs a week. And by all admissions from the police, that represented what they considered to be 10% of the number of meth labs in that town. The police chief is a character. And then finally, a woman who lived in a town south of there who was the primary methamphetamine trafficker in the Midwest at the time, and who also happens to be, her name is Lori Arnold, and she happens to be the sister of the comedian Tom Arnold.
In terms of, obviously you've done lots of research on meth, on the addiction, on the epidemic. From a public policy perspective, what should our policymakers be considering in terms of approaching this problem?
So for those of you who were at dinner, you can, I don't know, go to sleep for the next 5 minutes, because I already
Everybody else wants to hear that.
Right. I think that there are two things, and one of them can happen, and another one of them probably won't happen. Ideally, I think that what would happen is that people would be honest about the reality of the meth problem and the drug problem in general. It would be great if politicians would, and what I mean by that is that there's, one of the primary, I would say the primary impediment to reasonable drug policy in this country, in my opinion, is one of false expectation. And what I mean by that is that there's this notion that we have a drug war which is winnable, and being winnable equates with people not doing drugs. And that's just not real. It's just not going to happen. It can't happen. I mean, everybody would have to stop smoking cigarettes, drinking, doing everything else. It's not going to happen. So an admission of that, I think, would, and a retraction of this misnomered idea of a drug war and what that means in terms of our expectations, that would be really nice. Because I think it would engender real and useful conversation about what's going on. Assuming that doesn't happen, I think that at a federal level, with regard to meth, there's not going to be any policy that is going to confront it reasonably. At a state level, there is probably not going to be any policy that is going to confront it reasonably. In the last 18 months, there have been 28 different states that have tried to make cold medicine available by prescription only, and they have failed 28 out of 28 times. This is on top of a 30-year history of similar legislation that has failed over and over again, and to date there are only 2 states in 30 years that have enacted prescription-only policy. Prescription-only is one of the only realistic ways to combat the small cook meth industry. That's totally different from the cartel industry of meth. These are separate entities. But if at the local level you would enact prescription only, if you would have law enforcement deal with the problem or continue to deal with the problem as in many places as they have, and I think if you would also add to that a treatment component, my personal choice would be drug courts. If you would use that kind of a three-pronged approach, and you would also say, this is generally speaking, towns are different, counties are different, states are different, but generally speaking, if you would do what Oelwein did and say, meth is not really our problem, our economy is our problem. So we're going to work on the economy, we're going to have a treatment component, a law enforcement component, and we're going to get it out of, we're going to get local production, we're going to take a big hit on that. We're going to deal with that by doing prescription only. I think that is a great plan. It's one that has worked in many places, but it's also very hard to implement.
Winter's Bone tells a compelling story about a young woman who has to step up and take care of her family because of her dad being wanted on meth charges. I'm curious, did you see a lot of similar compelling personal human stories when you were doing the research and interacting with people for Methland?
Yeah, and you know, again, you know, taking into account the deep, you know, regional differences that don't just exist within the United States, but exist within the Midwest, and then also on a state-by-state basis. You know, I mean, Missouri in particular, there's the Ozarks in the south, which is essentially a southern place. There's Kansas City and St. Louis on either end, and then there's essentially southern Iowa north of Highway 70. Those are three culturally completely different places. But that being said, there were, and I went a lot of places for this book, not just in the Midwest, but all over the country. And I would add to that, you know, from New York to Los Angeles to Oelwein to the Ozarks, all of which were places that I spent time, you know, there are similar threads to the stories, and one of them is really, it's not a new one. It's that poverty and drugs in many ways do go together. That when these two things come to roost in a place, there are tears that result in the cultural and the social fabric that are generations old. And if you don't get ahead of them and don't minister to them, they will be more generations old before you get a handle on them. And you know, I guess the one thing that I would say is that, at least that I tried to do, is not demonize anybody and not caricaturize, is that a word? I don't know, anybody. I just tried to tell these stories, which in many ways, whether it's the prosecutor or the doctor or the mayor or the addict, in as real of terms as I could, with all their warts and all their conflicts. But yeah, you see the same story in a lot of places.
Okay. I have one last question, then we're going to open up to audience Q&A, and we'll have a couple students who will pop magically out of the glass door over there. Oh, they're going to actually come up from the back with cordless mics. So we'll get to that in just a moment, Nick, but let me ask you one last question. Speak to some of the obstacles that stand in the way of people who are doing meth getting treatment or special services.
The primary obstacle is money. You know, when I was in Oelwein, in a town of 6,000 people, at the time, the Department of Human Services cut 95% of all the jobs in Fayette County, Iowa. Now, if that were 95% of 300 jobs, that would be one thing, but I don't remember the statistic. It was 95% of not very many in the first place, essentially. In the town of Oelwein, there was one addiction specialist, this woman named Ginger McConnell. She was it in a town of 6,000 people, where they were busting 3 meth labs a week. So why? Because, I mean, there's a number of reasons why, but they all come back to money. This is not an easy thing. I mean, Oelwein is a particularly, to my mind, remarkable story. The Oelwein of today is very different. It's hardly recognizable compared to the Oelwein of 10 years ago. They did things there in order to raise money that, at a national level, I mean, can you imagine, for instance, that if you lived in a town where 50% of the commercial space is unoccupied, so you walk down Main Street, 50% of everything you look at is boarded up, right? One of the things that they did, the city council went to business owners, and as you got to understand, a town, like a county, like a state, like a nation, is a business. Takes money to run it. Oelwein found itself in the position of wanting new jobs from the outside, but they knew they weren't going to have new jobs when any prospective client essentially came there and found out about their meth problem. They had a 120-year-old septic system that, if they had lured new business, would not have been able to go into business because they didn't have the septic system that could have handled it. I mean, these are small, this is the stuff of small business, right? I mean, it's the unromantic things that nobody thinks about. So what they said was, if we got to deal with the meth problem, then we have all these other problems too. We got bad streets, we got a bad septic system, we got a bad water system. We're not going to do anything until we get these dealt with. How are we going to deal with it? One of the things that they did, the city council, is they went to small business owners who have businesses, the 50% of them who are left, and they convinced them to tax themselves. They passed a referendum to tax themselves to fix the septic system, because without it, how are you going to have new? Can you imagine this happening in the United States of America in the year 2012 when we can't even talk to each other about the most simple things? The point being that it's not just a question of, of treatment. That's one component. It's like a battle on every level. And these are people who were able to battle and deal. I mean, this was not easy. They fought with each other about this. It took a long time. They could not see eye to eye on a lot of this. That's just one small example, the tax referendum. But this is how they dealt with it, and they did it. So to me, I mean, this is a tremendous story. I wish it would happen more often.
Okay. We're going to open up to questions and answers from the audience. Before we do that, I want to let everybody know that we are selling Nick's book. I'm sure that all of you will want to pick up at least 1 or 2 or 3 copies and have him sign it. He'll be autographing them later. But if you'll raise your hand and don't get my attention, get one of the students' attention. I believe, Jen, you have a question back there.
Oh, okay. Nick, I'm going to beg to differ with you about the wonderful turnaround of Oelwein, Iowa. Mm-hmm. You walk down the main streets, it's still very high percentage of empty storefronts. Mm-hmm. Free and reduced lunch in that school system is mm-hmm. still over 50%. There has not been a great economic turnaround. You correlate the meth epidemic in that town quite heavily with the economic situation. But did you explore the fact that back in the 70s in that town, there was a prevalent drug culture, both illegal and legal? Mm-hmm. There was a physician in the area who handed out speed like it was Tic Tacs. There was an underlying drug problem that was pervasive before the 1980s, the economic decline and the rise of meth. Did that come forth in your research? Did you address that in any way?
What's his, Dr. Maynard or something like that? Is that his name? So, yeah, I heard a lot about Dr. Maynard. In terms of there still being 50% free and reduced lunch, when I was there, it was 80%. So, to me, I think that that's a fairly significant fairly significant improvement. Would I say, I think I can go out on a fairly sturdy limb by saying that, 99.9% of you in the room today probably don't want to move to Oelwein, Iowa from Lawrence, Kansas. But they have added 600 jobs since I was there, which is 600 that they didn't have at the time. And the population of the town has only changed negatively. So, 600 is a big number when you're talking about a town of 6,000 people, just like a jump or a decrease of 80% to 50 is, I think, it's an impressive one. So, I mean, one of the ways that I would I guess really one of the ways that I would answer, I think, your implied question is again in terms of expectation. And I think that what has happened there has certainly exceeded the expectation of when this began, dating to 2003. But it's not Saks Fifth Avenue, Iowa, and so.
Okay. Do we have a question on this side? Right back there.
Combating this meth problem, I wonder how you feel about this program or this TV show Breaking Bad. Having the protagonist be a meth dealer, is this doing more harm or good for especially young people when they look at something like that? Your thoughts?
The way I feel about Breaking Bad is that the number of times that I've been asked about it, if I were a reasonable person, would have driven me at some point before now to have watched an episode, and I just never have. So I can't speak to it specifically. I don't, in terms of a meth producer being, made a main character in a highly successful cable TV program. Do I think that's bad? I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to sort of throw it into the slush pile with all the other. I don't know. I mean, it's like, do video games make people violent? I don't know. I think that not monitored. I mean, it's sort of. We don't live in a world where there are not mixed signals that are sent to people, whether they're children or they're adults. And I think that the question is, for me as a parent, it's, what do you do about it in your home? How do you, I personally wouldn't choose to close somebody off from that reality, but I would certainly want to talk to them about what that reality means and the various ways where it's not allowed in my house. I don't know. It's the best I can do.
Okay.
I'm from Hannibal, Missouri, northeast Missouri. The town that was written about most recently is Tom and Huck don't live here anymore. And the experiences you're talking about sound very similar. Stories that I've heard around there are about women who are working really hard, single parents, working all day, sometimes only getting jobs at night, having children to take care of, perhaps parents, and they're on meth because it helps them get through. And you haven't spoken too much about women as addicts, and I wondered if you could verify or talk some about how more acceptable this drug seems, at least in the beginning, to women.
I think that that the woman to your right, who's from Oelwein or from near there, spoke to it earlier quite well in terms of the history of meth use as a pharmaceutically produced diet pill. The Rolling Stones song Mother's Little Helper is about amphetamine pills. And which is different from methamphetamine in some ways biochemically, but culturally, is it different? I don't think so. I think that that's a huge part of the history of this drug. That's a huge part of its acceptability on some level. I think that when you talk about drugs, and again, you have to talk about nicotine, alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, whatever. One of the things that you have to confront is the fact that we are willing as a culture and as a people to accept certain kinds of collateral damage and not accept others. So a 16-year-old kid that gets drunk and drives into an oak tree and kills him or herself is horrible, but we can live with that. What we can't live with is houses blowing up from meth labs. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't think it's important to say whether that's right or wrong. It's just, you have to deal with it on its own terms. And one of the things that's interesting about meth and about what I would argue is its history of cultural acceptability on some level is not only its association with working class Americans dating back to World War II. And what I would further argue is that the reason that it was socially acceptable is because it allows people to do the most American thing, which is to supersede class through hard work. But also, it allows, historically, it allowed women to do something that is, was associated with weight loss. This is a huge deal. It's like when you go back and look at archives of Life magazine from the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s and even into the 1980s, there are ads for pharmaceutically produced methamphetamine that have pictures of women, with huge smiles on their face and perfect figures while they're vacuuming, right? This says a lot, right? We can all agree that ads are deeply targeted toward how we feel about ourselves and who we want to be, right? So there's a long history of that with regard to meth and women. So.
Okay.
I'm curious where you're coming from in your thinking for your third book about 50 years from now in the Midwest. Can you tell us some of that?
I'm kind of curious too. The one who's the most curious is my editor, and I hate it every time he calls. I'll tell you the approach is, and what the Midwest is going to look like in 50 years. That's the elevator pitch, right? That's the please buy this book pitch. What that means, I don't know what the hell that means. But I figure that I'll figure it out by, I'll figure out sort of what I'm doing. But what I'm doing from kind of a strategy standpoint is I've picked 5 places and people in each of them who I think are, I try to identify, and really, part of the answer to this is in some ways the answer to an aspect of the answer to the first question, which is that, if you're writing nonfiction, you try as hard as you can to find somebody who you think is the conscience of a place, somebody who speaks for a place. The problem with that is that whether you're writing about 5 places in the Midwest that include everything from a city of 2.5 million people to a village in southern Illinois of 37 people, is that when you choose a person or people to talk to you about that place and who you think is representative of that place. What they're not doing is speaking for the other 36 or the other 2,499,999. So, that's just the reality of journalism. And what you come up with is what you feel to be is the truth of a place and of a person in their life. So, what that means in answer to your question more specifically is I am trying to look at 5 different places and how I feel that they are representative of about 5 different trends in the Midwest, and how their histories and how what they've been doing seem to me indicative of where they are headed, and how those 5 in turn are indicative of where the region is headed. If you find that to be a satisfactory answer, I hope you'll send an email to my editor, because until I get it written down, he doesn't. But that's kind of what I'm doing.
I think you've already answered this question. I'd hate to make you restate yourself. Is this a female drug, meth, or is it associated with men? Or how stigmatized is this drug on a scale from 1 to 10? Is it like crack cocaine, or is it in the field of marijuana? I mean, I really don't. This is completely new to me. So,
the kind of accepted reality of the drug depends on what period in history you're talking about and what part of the country you're talking about. So, if you talk about meth in Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York as an example, the standard notion of the drug in those 3 places would be as a drug used primarily by gay white men. Although, interestingly, in the last decade, it's started to become, the perception has changed to a drug that is used increasingly, if not in majority, by gay African American men. That's just kind of the way it's viewed. In the middle of the country, it is. I think the report that I read by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is the outfit that's run by the quote-unquote drug czar. They did a report in 2005 that, and I don't know how they came up with this, but they identified in the non-coastal United States, they identified an average meth user as a 28-year-old white male with less than 4 years of college education, who made less than the median income, whatever that means. If you were to talk about meth in the 70s and 80s, you would probably think of it in terms of housewives. So it's kind of a moving target over time and over regions. What that says to me is that this is that's 3 or 4 or 5 pretty broadly defined demographics. So what it says to me is that there's a lot of people who use meth.
We're going to take 2 more questions, one on this side, and we're going to get this gentleman, Jen, right here.
The person Alex is with had their hand up for a while.
That's fine. That's why I said on this side, and then we'll get this gentleman.
Let me just first say I'm glad you had to write that check to Sebastian Junger, because this is a great book. If nobody has read it yet, definitely pick up a copy. I particularly enjoyed the afterword, where you had the tense town meeting and you described sort of how Oelwein and some of your major characters have developed since you finished the book. And I was wondering if first you kept in touch with any of those folks, and second, if you've had kept in touch, if you could talk about some of the meth addicts in particular, like Major and his son Buck, and then Roland Jarvis.
Thank you. First of all, I have kept in touch with, so I get through Oelwein generally once or twice since the book came out, which is to say 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 4 summers. I generally get through there once a summer, if not twice. Either by happenstance or because I go and visit Nathan, who's now married to Jamie. And I keep him pretty, we've gotten to be pretty good friends, and so I do keep in touch with them. For a while, I kept in touch with Roland and Major long enough to know that in both of their cases, not much had changed. Major was still clean, and Roland was still not. So I catch up with Lori every now and again, mostly through third source stuff. She was in one of the big British tabloids, did a great big spread on her the other, I don't know when it was, a year or 2 ago, and she was on the Dr. Drew show, I think, in the last 6 months. So, I read about her, but we don't have much direct contact anymore.
As far as ease of addiction and difficulty of withdrawal, where does meth rank with heroin or cocaine or nicotine?
One of the initially, and what I mean by initially is when I was researching the book, it was considered to be like impossible to get off of. It was considered, or somewhere in the neighborhood of impossible to get off of. Since then, thankfully, there have been studies that have shown that, and one study actually showed that it's somewhere on the level that meth addicts and alcoholics have similar success given 2 different treatment strategies. The reality of addressing something like that is the same as the reality of addressing quantitatively how many people do meth and what's the addiction rate, which is that it's almost impossible to it's impossible to numerologically and quantitatively characterize an answer to that. A lot of what we take for reality comes from anecdotal response, to the extent of treatment rates and things like that. The one thing that I would say is that it seems pretty clear to me that what was once viewed as like totally hopeless turns out to be not at all totally hopeless, and in fact turns out to be somewhat similar to all the other drugs that are hard to get off of.
Nick, thanks a lot for a great discussion tonight.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.